Hi, everybody, and thanks for coming to a very special session of Startup Week. Today we have with us David Rusenko. David is a 2007 graduate of the College of IST. Woohoo! Um, uh, as an undergraduate, he and a pair of his student colleagues began development of a product that ended up being called Weebly, evolved that into a very successful company, which was subsequently acquired by Square, where David is now the general manager of eCommerce. So quite a story. Oh, David is also the youngest ever recipient of the Penn State Alumni Achievement Award, which I think is pretty cool. And I'm sure you're here to hear David and not me. So without further introduction, I'll pass it over. Please welcome David Rusenko. I'm probably the only one that can clap, so I'll clap loud.
Thanks, and it's great to be here. I want to make sure we have time for questions at the end too. But first, want to get started with two things. So first of all, I'll just give you a very brief recap of the Weebly story and what that was like. I think might be interesting for some of you. We found ourselves in a similar spot as students at Penn State, and kind of what that looks like, what that journey looked like. And then I want to spend a lot of time talking about product market fit. What is product market fit? How do you find it? And I think that's a topic that's also really relevant for this class, but especially relevant for anyone who is starting a company. So without further ado, a quick intro. What is Weebly? Weebly is an easy way for entrepreneurs to build a website or an online store. We wrote the first line of code in February in 2016, grew the company to over 50 million users, about 350 employees, and then sold to Square in May of 2018. And about half of the United States visits a Weebly site every single month. So that sort of gives you an idea of where we eventually ended up. But why don't we take it from the beginning? A little bit more about the story and what the journey looked like for us. So here's a picture I took in February of 2006. I would say this is a familiar looking picture, except maybe not this year. But here we are, students at Penn State. This was the spring semester of my junior year. As part of a class project in Dr. Santoro's class, we had to write a web app, and the idea in the beginning was just very simple. How do we make it easy for anyone to create a website? At the time, that was actually a really hard thing. A lot of, you had to know how to code, or really it was difficult for non-technical people to be able to create a website. Let's fast forward to August of 2006. So about 6 months later, we still hadn't launched. We were still working on the product. And I want to introduce this graph. What this graph is actually, it's a graph of the new signups per day. So it's not cumulative. You can see at this point, we're just inviting friends and family, other people we knew. And our highest sign up day at this point was about 12 people, it looks like. Here we are in October 2006. We're 8 months later, and we're just starting to get some, trying to hustle for buzz on forums, just posting around, really still in this kind of alpha beta stage. You can see here how our largest sign up day had a little bit over 30 signups. In October 2006, so about 8 months later, we applied to Y Combinator with less than an hour to go on the deadline. I was actually reading Slashdot at the time before going to bed, and just read about YC. It was a new program at the time. I believe we were the third class, so a lot of people didn't know about it. The deadline was that night, so I hurried together an application and submitted it. Here we are in November of 2006. So we were posted on TechCrunch for the first time. Now this is 9 months in, and this is another thing that I want to really emphasize in this story is just look at, we've been working on this near full time, nights, weekends, every other hour of the day where we weren't either studying or working our internships. 9 months later, we first launched, obviously exciting time, and you can see here now all of a sudden, wow, hundreds of people per day are signing up. We actually, the reason this graph looks the way it does is that we had actually started to gate signups because we were worried about load and our site crashing. Here we go in January of 2007. We're accepted into Y Combinator about 11 months later. packed up all of our belongings, into my car, drove cross country to San Francisco, got marooned in Wyoming for 3 days in a snowstorm, but eventually made it out here. You could also see, if you're particularly perceptive, you could see a little bit of downtime. We had 1 day where we had 0 signups. So obviously the site was down. We're working on getting it to scale, but what you notice is that graph goes up and then it kind of comes back down and it settles at a new level, which is exciting, but it's not skyrocketing. Here's what a picture of our apartment, our first apartment in San Francisco looks like. And I think the size of the computer monitors and the CRT TV really starts to date this picture in terms of how long ago this was. But really, I think that, the important thing here is we had 3 desks, we pushed them together, and we were just coding and working around the clock, pretty much every waking hour. We would typically work at that point in time. We kind of worked the night shift naturally because no one was there to bug us. So we'd typically go to bed at about 9 a.m. and just sleep until we had enough sleep, and then wake up and start all over again. Here we go. The second time we're mentioned on TechCrunch. So, a lot more familiar here. A spike up, a spike down. This is 11 months later. But then in April 2007, this is 14 months later, at the end of the Y Combinator program, this is kind of a really pivotal moment. We had less than $100 in our bank account. We had rent that was going to be due in a couple of weeks. Certainly not cheap rent in San Francisco, and things weren't exactly looking like they were taking off. I mean, certainly you were mentioned in the press a couple times, and it seems to settle at a bit higher of a level, but actually the trend is kind of going down, not up. So kind of a pivotal moment, but out of the Y Combinator program, we ended up raising a round of funding, which meant we could kind of continue on for a bit longer. Here's May of 2007. So we were featured in Newsweek. You can see here, actually, wow, that really brought us a lot more awareness. But what do you notice about this graph too is that those numbers are still trending down. They're not trending just up and to the right. This is 15 minutes after. Sure, we've settled at a new level, but those numbers are sloping down. Here's August 2007. This time we're featured in Time. Very, very similar, very, very similar story on this graph too. We settled at a higher level, but things are sloping down. Now, the point I really want to make here is this is 18 months in. We've been working for 1.5 years, and we still don't have product market fit. So, one of those things, I think there's a lot of these misconceptions of overnight successes, or, people just go and, launch something and it takes off. That certainly didn't happen with us, and it certainly doesn't happen with most people. It really, it takes a long time. 1.5 years, 18 months is a long time. Then we could fast forward and, 10 years later, still working on similar concepts. So it really does just take a lot of time. But here we go in October of 2007, we get our first real traction. 20 months later, finally things start taking off, and we'll sort of get into the why behind this a bit later. But it really does come down to product market fit. It really does come down to finally the product had met that bar where people were returning to use it. They were telling their friends. All of a sudden, things start to look easy when you find that. Now here in February 2010, 4 years later, you can kind of see those graphs look a lot more up and to the right now. You can see those little wiggles all the way back in 2007 look kind of quaint on, in the rearview mirror, and and things are really taking off. So those were the early days, but as you can see from that story, the really critical piece that any company has to figure out in their early days is product market fit. So why don't we talk about what is product market fit? This is the classic Y Combinator saying, make something people want. I think if we had the benefit of adding a couple words, you'd want to say, make something a lot of people want. You want to be focused on solving a real need that people have in a big market. So what are the stages of starting a company? You start from, I have an idea. Really the earliest stages of a company. Here are the phases. You effectively go from idea phase. That's where you have an idea for a company you'd like to start. Maybe it's something that you just thought of, or something that you thought of a long time ago and that you're trying to, getting around to working on that idea. Maybe some of you are at that idea stage right now. The next phase is prototype. That's where you really start to say, okay, I'm going to take my idea, whether it's, actually coding up a prototype or having a medium fidelity tool that allows you to build a testable prototype without having to actually write a line of code. That next phase is really getting it in a more tangible form where it's actually screens, whether it's, an app that you could actually tap on, or a website or whatever that might be. You could actually play around with it. And this really starts to prove out that you can start to actually build what you say you can with your idea. The next phase is launch. And that's where you really get your product into the hands, whether that's, whether you've had an alpha or beta, and now you're fully launching. This is really where you start to get press, where you're publicly available and you really run into for the first time, real user metrics. Then, the next stage after that is the traction stage, right? So these aren't all inevitable. Past the point where you launch, then that's where you really want to see some of these metrics of people returning and, a lot of people continuing to use your product, and then increasingly more and more people continue to use your product. After that's the monetization phase. I actually put monetization after traction because traction is the harder and, more difficult and trickier problem to solve. Getting product market fit will usually result in traction. It's much more common for companies to fail to get product market fit than it is for companies with product market fit to fail at monetization. So it's not to say it can't happen. It's not to say that that some companies never figured out how to make money. But typically, if you're solving a really important problem that a lot of people have, you'll figure out the monetization side. And then the last phase is growth. So this is really, okay, I have a company, I have traction, I have a business model, right? And then there's this whole other phase on how do I continue scaling up the company, and what does that look like? Now, the other thing I want to underscore here is when you look going from idea to traction stage, this is your initial product market fit search. So this is when you are proving out your idea hypothesis of, is this idea or is this solution that I have something that a lot of people need? But what's also really important to remember is the further you go after the monetization phase into the growth phase, you still need to continue to refine your product market fit. It's really important not to forget that your product is still, sometimes you just barely clear that hurdle product market fit, and there's a lot of work left to do in order to continue bringing the company to its full potential. So here are really the top early challenges at a startup when you start a company. The number one is finding product market fit. By far, this is the challenge that will get most companies and prevent them from being successful. Challenge number two, hiring and building a world-class team. Very, very difficult as well, and and a lot to talk about on that front, but not really a topic here. The third, like we talked about, monetization, making money. This is really a distant third as far as the type of challenge and really how typical it is for companies to figure out product market fit but not monetization. And then later, and this is much further down the road, how do you build an organization that scalably and repeatedly launches great products? So let's talk a little bit about creating a market. The best companies in the world end up creating their own market. And what does that mean? That means that you think of, for example, an Uber, right? It's a company that, if you just looked at the market for transportation before Uber, you'd see taxis, you would see limos, you'd see town cars, but you wouldn't see ride sharing, right? And Uber was able to actually take a look at this market, identify a need that people had, and actually go and create a new market, ride sharing. So if you're going to create a new market, by definition, market research doesn't help. So how do you go about finding, a new or creating a new market? Well, first of all, you need to find a hidden need. You need to understand what are you a substitute for? So while ride sharing is a new market, it was a substitute for other things that were available. Ride sharing can be a substitute for taxis. Ride sharing can also be a substitute for car ownership. So what's the need that you're serving better? And really, what's the job that you're being hired to do? Also kind of understand, as you're starting a company, where are you getting pulled? Where are customers making do even with the limitations of your current product? How are they using it in a way that maybe you didn't intend? You know, when there's people that have such a clear need that they're willing to put up with a product that doesn't even meet their needs exactly, but they're able to hack it to make it work, that's something you should definitely pay attention to and double down on that. And then the last kind of interesting pattern is that oftentimes what you create initially seems like it fits into an existing market, but with less functionality. So, you know, it's very easy for the incumbents to look at that and say, oh, this isn't our market, right? And you know, there's a lot of books written about this. You know, if you look at, for example, the transition from, you know, back in, you know, spinning metal hard drives, you know, looking at the hard drives to go from 3.5 inch to 2.5 inch, right? Like the classic story here is that all the metrics for 2.5 inch drives when they first came out were worse. You know, throughput was worse, RPMs were worse, storage capacity was worse. So everything was worse about this drive, it seemed, except for the fact that it was smaller. And the fact that it was smaller actually created this entirely new category, because that's when Apple first created the iPod and wrapped a music player around a smaller hard drive and created an entirely new category in the process. Over time, that 2.5 inch hard drive got better and better. It spun faster, it got more storage, and eventually completely displaced 3.5 inch drives. So let's talk about building a remarkable product. You know, because I think a lot of you know, a lot of students that I've talked to are sort of in this phase of, you know, I have an idea, I'm starting to build my product, and how do I go about doing that? So, you know, the obvious steps here, you know, step 1, have a great idea. Step 2, talk to customers. Step 3, something happens. And step 4, it's all amazing, right? But what is that step 3? You're talking to customers. What do you do kind of in that in-between state? And I want to break it down actually in sort of very specific, concrete steps. So what is step 3? The first thing you need to do is always be talking to customers. So whoever your customers are, whatever preconceived notions you have about their needs, I guarantee you they're probably wrong, just because everyone's wrong about it. And you certainly won't learn anymore without either calling them up or visiting them or Zooming with them or whatever it is that you're going to do, you know, to start understanding their needs more deeply. The second piece, and I think this one's really, really important, is you need to listen to their problems, not their solutions. And we'll talk about this a little bit more, but Steve Jobs had that famous quote where he says, you know, customers don't tell me what they need, kind of I tell them what they need. But the key insight in that is that don't necessarily just take what they say they want and then just go build that. What you really want to do is you want to listen to what their problems are. What are the things they're really struggling with? And then you want to take those problems, you want to become deeply invested in them, and you want to figure out, how do I come up with a fantastic solution to those problems? It might be a very different solution than what your customers are proposing, which tends to be sort of very immediate, very tactical. The next phase is you really need to go through rapid prototyping and user testing. So, you know, it could help to have screenshots, but most helpful is going to be to have some kind of prototype that people could play around with. You want to build that solution to their problems, and you want to take that solution and test it with them. You know, the best you're going to get is the data, the metrics of how are people using your product. And we'll talk about some of the key metrics that you want to pay attention to there. But did it work? If it didn't work, go back to step 1, go back to talking to your customers, you know, understanding a little bit more deeply exactly what they're trying to solve, and then rapid iteration. I think one important point, and this is really important when a lot of people will come and ask me, a lot of students will come and ask me and say, oh, I have an idea. Actually, not just students will come and say, hey, I have an idea. You know, I just need to, you know, outsource my app, or I just need to get my app built by someone else. And, you know, I don't program myself. The interesting thing is, you know, everyone has this notion that they'll just have the app built and it'll be successful. But when you understand that, you know, how many iterations are typically involved, that sort of changes the game in terms of how you think about how you want to build your team, what skills you need to have represented on the team, and even, you know, how feasible it is to go and outsource an app. You could outsource one version of an app. It'd be very difficult to outsource 27, you know, versions and iterations of that app. You know, for almost anyone, that would just be cost prohibitive. So let's talk a little bit about a couple of these steps. The first one is in listening to their problems and not their solutions. So here's a quote from Steve Jobs. He said, "Some people say, give the customers what they want, but that's not my approach. I think Henry Ford once said, if I'd asked customers what they wanted, they would have told me a faster horse. People don't know what they want until you show it to them. That's why I never rely on market research." So this is a really famous quote. I actually think it's also very misunderstood. It is absolutely critical to talk to customers to understand their pain. And if you understand how Apple does their development for all their products, they're deeply embedded in the customer problem. But what they don't do is they don't listen to the proposed solutions, right? They go back and they say, what is the underlying thing that our customers are trying to accomplish? How can we create a solution that's even better than the faster horse, right? That's actually a car, that's creating something entirely new that customers maybe didn't even imagine themselves, but that's solving this critical need that we deeply understand by talking to them. The third is around rapid prototyping and user testing. So, I think it's less common these days, but building a fully functional product, launching it, and then finding out it doesn't meet the needs very well is an incredibly expensive way to test your hypothesis. So what you want to do is you want to focus on getting to that functional prototype as quickly as possible. Don't worry about sort of everything that comes next. Don't worry about scaling, monetization, all that kind of stuff. What you really want to do is you want to set yourself up for rapid iteration. You want to be able to build lots of versions in rapid succession. So you want to keep your burn low. You want to build a team that can do this quickly. That's why ideally you have at least one person that knows how to program, if not more. Bring all those skills together on that initial team so that you could very quickly and rapidly prototype, test, and then iterate. Then test the solution with your customers. So there's a couple things that are important to note up front. The first is make sure you're talking to your target customers. So what's interesting about this one is that if your target customer is, if your target customer is a small business owner, then testing it with your college friends is probably not the right way to go about user testing. It sort of makes sense, right? It's kind of obvious, but a lot of people make this mistake of testing on the wrong people who then pull their product in the wrong direction. And the last thing is, don't overthink it. A lot of times anecdotal is okay. And we'll talk about why that is. So a few key tools that you have in the early days when you're testing. The first one is customer interviews. You'll probably need to get the right sample size. You'll probably need about 5 to 10 customer interviews. You want to make sure, this is really hard to do, you want to make sure that when you talk to one of your target customers, you don't want to, in the way that you ask your questions or in the direction you're pushing, you don't want to pre-bias them towards any given answers. But try to ask open-ended questions, try to understand their key pain points, and try to dig in deeper around what it is specifically that needs to be solved. So 5 to 10 interviews is typically enough there to really get a sense for what these problems are that are shared across this target customer base. The second one is UX testing sessions. Interestingly enough, on the UX side, only about 3 to 5 needed. What you do for UX testing is, we'll talk a little bit more in depth, but it's essentially getting someone in front of a phone, in front of a computer, and just watching how they use it. And then lastly, metrics. It is very easy to tell stories with data that aren't actually there, that are more anecdotal, that are just noise in the data. But metrics are useful, and we'll talk a little bit about what are the key metrics that you want to look at. So in terms of UX testing sessions, so I think this is probably the most simple and invaluable tool that you can have. And again, breaking it down into excruciatingly painful detail here, what does this look like? So what you're really trying to do is you're trying to get someone to use your app or your service in front of you so that you can watch their usage patterns and behavior and understand where the stumbling blocks may be. So the first thing is you really want to encourage them to give open and honest feedback. Unfortunately, most people will feel too awkward about kind of dumping on your baby giving you bad feedback. So you really want to encourage them, like explaining them. This is kind of the whole point, is you want to hear their struggles and their feedback. The next thing you want to do is you want to ask them to perform a task. Some of these apply a little bit more in person than over Zoom, but it's the same concept. Your immediate instinct is just to grab the mouse, or just as you watch them struggle, say, "Oh no, click there," or kind of jump in. But the next step is the most important. Don't say or do anything. So let's say you have an app that you got them to open for the first time, and you want them to sign up for your app. You would say, even better, if you're going to start your testing session, say, okay, can go download the app. This is what it's called. Watch them do that. Watch them go through. Maybe you'll discover something important, like the fact that maybe when they search for the name of the app or certain keywords, they'll have a hard time finding it. But let's say they've downloaded the app, they open up the app, and you say, okay, sign up for an account. And then what you'll often find is that people really struggle. They look around, they're not sure, and that's right the point where we want to say, oh, it's the green button, or oh, you have to tap this, right? And just kind of sit there and feel their pain and feel their struggle as they go through it. And not only is it a powerful motivator, but you'll really get a sense for how people are using your product. Interestingly, you only need about 3 to 5 testing sessions. Typically only even 3 will do, where all of the sort of big UX bugs, all those things that are confusing for people, they tend to be fairly common, they tend to be fairly shared, and you'll very quickly get a sense for what your big usability issues are. Let's talk about when to launch. When to launch your company, make it publicly available and try to go get press. Minimum viable product, or MVP is maybe a term that a lot of you have heard. There's one particular word that I don't really like there, and that's viable. I think minimum remarkable product would be a better term. And so really it's not about, hey, can I launch something out there that's the bare minimum? It's, hey, can I put something out there that is the minimum to do a good job at solving this need? Or another way of putting it, this is one of my favorite quotes from Paul Buchheit. He said, launch when your product is better than what's out there. Some people can make the mistake of just launching with too small of an MVP and not getting the right data, not getting the right usage patterns. Some people make the mistake of trying to build the perfect product and in a room and never emerging to actually go get that user feedback. It's important to try to find that line when you say, look, what I have is actually better than anything else out there. Let's go and put it on the market. Here's another common thing that people struggle with is just prioritizing. So you're starting a company, there's a million things. There's an infinite, near infinite amount of things to do, and the list never gets smaller. And so how do you prioritize? And people start moving every which direction, just kind of intuitively what's interesting to them, maybe what's easiest, what feels like the most progress. The way that you should be prioritizing in the early days, really along 2 different axes. The first one is there's really one thing that matters. What is that one thing? It depends on the stage that you're at, and it depends on the company. But whatever that one thing is that gets you to your next milestone, focus on that one thing. And it's really hard to do because it's so easy to get sucked into making a logo or incorporating the company or writing a business plan or whatever it is that feels like progress. But in reality, what you want to do is understand what's my next milestone and then have laser focus on only the one thing that helps you get there. And in this case, moving from the idea stage, really to the traction stage, that's product market fit. The second thing that I think a lot of people could get a grasp of better is just optimize for learning. So a lot of people will prioritize their list by creating this sort of cost benefit analysis. Okay, here's how difficult this thing is to build, and here's how much benefit it might bring us. But instead, a more useful way when you're trying to not make that's actually a great model, by the way, for continuous sort of linear improvement. So you have a product out there, and you want to continue to make these incremental improvements. That that model works. But when you're trying to go from 0 to 1, when you're trying to make this big leap, instead ask yourself, what's our biggest unknown? What's the biggest question that we have? And if we answer that question, it would rewrite our entire priority list. And try to go and optimize for learning. Try to go to optimize to answer that question. And it turns out you'll have a whole new set of priorities to focus on. So next up, some people say, well, how do I know when I've achieved product market fit? So there's a few things you can look at. Let's look at metrics. So I think there's a few metrics that are important. By far, the most important metric is returning usage. So when someone shows up as a visitor, as a prospect, and then goes and signs up for your service, what percentage of those people will return a day later, 3 days later, 7 days later, 30 days later? And just understanding that is the clearest signal that you started to strike product market fit, is when you actually get people coming back of their own will, of their own volition, without you having to bug them, and continue using your product. And typically, even this is such a strong indicator. Typically, even if you bug your family to sign up for your product, as invested as they are in you and your success, they'll probably also not have that natural drawback to the product and continue using it on their own. So this is probably the strongest signal. The second one is NPS, or Net Promoter Score. Effectively, if you've ever answered one of those questions, if you're not familiar, how likely are you to recommend this product to a friend on a scale from 0 to 10? That's NPS. And you calculate it by saying the percentage of people that answer 9 or 10, those are your promoters, minus the percentage of people who answer 0 to 6, those are your detractors. And then it's super strict, because the percentage of people who answer 7 or 8, we just throw them out. They don't actually even really count. They certainly bring down your average, but you have to answer 9 or 10 to be considered a promoter. So it's promoters, percent of promoters minus detractors. Your NPS should be above 50 to really say you have product market fit, and that's very hard to get to. And then lastly is renewal rates, paying customer renewal rates. So you kind of see the pattern here. We don't have conversion. We don't have some of these metrics that you might typically see. It's really about returning usage and how often, whether a paying customer or someone who just signed up, how often they come back to use the product. Again, we don't look at signups. We don't look at conversion rate. These things clearly, let's look at signups. What would happen if you had a lot of signups and really bad retention, right? In that case, what you're effectively doing is you have a large leaky bucket, and if the holes in your bucket are big enough, you could fill that bucket up with a fire hose, and the water, maybe temporarily you have some water in your bucket while the fire hose is still on. The more that fire hose starts to shut off, the more that bucket's just going to completely empty. And it turns out that every company sooner or later reaches their total addressable market. Even Facebook, right? Eventually reaches the total number of human beings on the planet. And if your product can't, if your bucket isn't sound, if it's leaking water, then eventually all that water will end up leaking out. So that's why signups early on, they're a signal, but not a great signal, because maybe you've attracted a lot of attention successfully. Maybe there's the spark of an idea there, but if people aren't coming back, you're in trouble. And same thing on conversion rate. And this is kind of, that's a more kind of analytical definition. But looking at, you'll know when you achieve product market fit when customers start beating a path to your door. When you don't have product market fit, everything feels hard. It feels like you're just pushing against the wave, and just struggling to gain adoption. And when you do have product market fit, everything's easy. It feels like every move you make works. It just feels like you're a genius. And obviously the reality is somewhere between the two, where when you have product market fit, you're obviously not a total genius. You still need to focus on refining that product market fit if you want to continue scaling up the company. So I'll talk a little bit about a couple concepts beyond product market fit. These are I wouldn't focus too much on these in the early days, but I think it's useful to understand some of these concepts as you're thinking through the idea of the company, the core of the product. So here's 3 key things a startup effectively needs to do. A product that is meaningfully better than alternatives, and that's everything we've been talking about so far. But then at some point, you're gonna need to figure out how to acquire customers in a differentiated way that scales. And you need to be able to invent your business model to the concept of monetization. Oftentimes can come, not always, can come after your product is out there. You need to be able to invent your business model without killing your traction. And here's kind of another way to visualize that. So this is called the product market channel model fit. So a bit of a mouthful, but it does expose that there's more than just product and market. You can have product and market fit, but there's also channel and model. So model meaning business model, how you charge, and oftentimes innovations on a business model can actually lead to entirely new markets, as well as a channel. And in this case, that really means how are you acquiring customers? Is it on social media? Is it through advertising? If it's through advertising, which channels? Is it on display? Is it on PPC? So, each of those can have their own intricacies. And, if you find the, model and channel are very related, if your business model, if you're not charging enough money, oftentimes that means you won't be able to pay for the advertising that helps you acquire customers. But model and channel are very related, but they're also very related with product and market. At the end of the day, the single best way that the most successful companies end up scaling tends to be word of mouth. And when you build something that is not just incrementally better, it's not just 10% better, 20% better, but 10x better, then that's where you tend to start to see a lot of that word of mouth and that virality start to build on its own. Scaling the team. Let's talk about this very briefly. I'm going to mention this in the context of how you want to think about this in the early days. But one thing that's really important is that the entire dynamic of a company changes, beyond about, let's call it 25 people. What happens at that point is that you can't be a completely flat organization anymore. It actually starts to become really inefficient. And you have to start building structure, hierarchy into the company. But as it turns out, that's actually not a great model for exploring and finding product market fit. So, before you have product market fit, before you have all this traction, even if you manage to raise a large round of funding, it's really important, in my opinion, to keep the company on the smaller side. 20 people may even sound like a huge company to a lot of, to a lot of you. And that's fine too. 1, 2, 3 people at this stage is very healthy, actually. A little amount of micromanagement is at this stage is healthy. The founder should understand everything about, don't start reading books about management and talking about delegation. The founders need to understand everything. That's your superpower at this stage, is having one person who understands everything about the company and can create extreme efficiency in decision making, and in how fast you can move. But let's talk about what happens next. After you've found product market fit, then it's time to scale aggressively. Presumably you found or created a new market, but even if you haven't heard of your competitors, you're probably not the only one. Humans don't operate in a vacuum. If you've, whatever media and news and books that we're all reading at the same time, ideas tend to emerge spontaneously by multiple people at the same time. And so that's likely happened for you as well. What that means is that you're in a race to capture the new market. It's important that you understand that a lot of advantages accrue to the number one company in that market. Sooner or later, you could go years without facing that reality, but sooner or later, you'll realize that, whether it's actual network effects, whether it's the ability for the top company to, be able to invest more in marketing, or potentially invest more in R&D and building a better product, or raise more money, whatever it is, those advantages can really start to accrue. So at that point in time, you should really build the team aggressively, but thoughtfully, and no more micromanagement. You'll need to completely change the way that you operate. And so, if you ever get to that stage and you feel like you're hitting a brick wall, email me and I could help talk through some of the learnings of that. And this is the last one before we get to questions. But I want to talk a little bit about building a brand, again, because this case study, I think, is the sort of perfect in the lab case study for building a brand. It's not likely to be this clean for everyone, but it is really useful to kind of understand how brand and product relate. So great brands are built on a core consumer insight. And ideally, that's exactly the same core consumer insight that your product is built on. It can become extremely powerful if you can identify and articulate this insight early on. And this becomes the core foundation for your brand. So let's talk about a company that did that really well. So Virgin America, they were starting a new airline in the US, and that's something that's certainly not done very often. And so they started off talking to their customers and understanding their problems. And their research showed that there was effectively 4 reasons why people selected one airline over another. It was price, and in this sense, it's literally $1 less, and I choose that one. So you have a flight on American that's $225. You have a flight on Delta that's $215. I'm buying the $215 flight. You have routes, which means in the Bay Area we have SFO and we have Oakland. For certain people, it's really important to go into one airport or the other. So understanding direct flights versus layovers, all that kind of stuff. People would select based on that. Schedule. So if there's a flight at times that leaves at 9 a.m., might be vastly preferential to a flight that leaves at 11 a.m., even though it's only separated by a few hours. So that can really come into play. And lastly, frequent flyer program. So if you're on Delta's frequent flyer program, let's say, you're going to have, for that subset of customers, they're going to have a tendency to really want to rebook on Delta. As they looked at all of these reasons, and those were the only reasons why people selected their airlines. And as they looked at all these reasons, what they realized is that all of these were reinforced by scale. So as a startup airline, you were not going to win on price. You were not going to win on routes. You were not going to win on schedule, and you're certainly not going to win on your frequent flyer program. So what's the hope for a startup airline that's hoping to barge in? So they asked themselves, can we create a new reason? And here's where their core consumer insight that came out of all of their customer research and their customer interviews became really important. That people hated flying. At that point in time, and still, that just the experience of flying was awful. It wasn't fun. People were jammed in. And so they said, look, what if we build a product and a brand around creating the best flying experience? That's something that we can win on day one. That's something we can use. And so they kind of create that new category on day one. And then the interesting thing is this was the North Star for all of their efforts around the company, both on the product and the brand. So, where other airlines maybe couldn't justify upgrading their planes with fancy lighting and, that changes colors and that was really cool, they could, because they understood that was money invested into their core product experience and into that core insight. It became a basis for which routes they chose, which people they hired. And even when they did all of their PR, you'll notice if you go and look back, every single event they did it on the plane. Why did they do those events on the plane? They did it because they wanted to highlight the flying experience. They wanted to constantly reinforce down to that core insight of this is the best experience of flying, and we want to show it to you through the event and also reinforce how fun flying with us can be. So I just mentioned this because, as you're going and you're thinking through what is a brand, what is a product at the earliest stages, it can be powerful to understand that those two are related. And again, like I mentioned in the beginning, you probably won't get to something this crisp. It's incredibly rare, but it's not a bad idea to start thinking about what that core consumer insight is. So that's all I have on content, but I would love to take any questions from people.
Okay, and we have a lot of questions, David, so I'll go ahead and just start reeling them off, and you can take your time with those if that's okay with you. The first one is, what was the hardest part of being part of a larger design team throughout your process?
The hardest part about being part of a larger design team, I'm not sure I fully understand the context of the question, but I'd say if we're talking about product design, kind of visual design, I think what's inherently more difficult with larger teams is becomes a communication, right? So when you start to break a product apart into pieces, and one team is responsible for this screen or this area, and another team is responsible for this area, what you tend to find a lot of times is that you end up shipping your org chart, basically is the term for it. These areas tend not to coexist very well. They tend not to be very integrated. They tend not to consider the needs of other areas. And so, one of the harder things with the larger design team is just making sure that you have that your product's fully cohesive, that it's well integrated, and that it presents as one cohesive vision, as opposed to the vision of a dozen different teams.
Okay, the next one is, you said you guys didn't have a lot of background in programming when you started the project. How did you get the project started? Did you rely on mentors or more experienced programmers to guide you?
Yeah, so I must have given the wrong impression. Of the three founders, two of us were technical, meaning we programmed. So Chris and myself wrote the first lines of code for the first couple of years, really, before we hired our first additional engineer onto the team. I think for a lot of people who don't know how to code, there's that question of, how do I find a programmer? Can I outsource the app? And I think one of the best things you can do is actually to learn to program. And it sounds kind of crazy. It sounds like maybe that's something that that's not for you. But there's a couple of reasons why it can be really important. Number one, you can unblock yourself. So you can actually start writing. There's a lot of tools these days that maybe don't require actual code to go and start prototyping an app. Different no-code platforms. You can actually, first of all, rely on yourself to make forward progress, as opposed to trying to find someone else. Number two, though, is investing in that technical knowledge will be incredibly beneficial down the road when the company is more successful and you do have a team of programmers. That's a whole nother language. That's a whole nother way of thinking that, if you don't have that, will just make your life a lot harder. So the more you can invest in that up front, the more you can benefit in the near term as well as down the road.
Okay, next question. What kept you focused and determined through those 18 months where the reception of your product felt uncertain?
Good question. I think for us it was just fun. We had the idea that as I think anyone who starts a company does, really felt like we were onto something. Really believed in the idea. We certainly saw the need, and so we were just having a blast. We enjoyed programming. We enjoyed really diving deep into the problem and coming up with just interesting, elegant, and innovative solutions to that. That was a really fun time for us. So I think that's what kept us motivated. If you look at a lot of that first principles thinking, a lot of that, hey, how do we redesign the whole experience of what it means to build a website without writing code? A lot of those concepts are now just pervasive everywhere, and it were things that we were, things that you saw a picture of those three desks pushed together. Those were things we were all inventing together at 4 a.m. And so I think for us, even though with the benefit of hindsight, you sort of look at those graphs, you say things weren't going well. I think we're just pretty optimistic and excited about what we were working on.
Okay, next question. How were you able to separate Weebly from other competitors to succeed? It says there are a lot of website building aids that were in production at about the same time, such as WordPress, Shopify, etc. Also, how did you know that your idea of Weebly was something that people wanted before starting the project?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think two parts. The first is kind of what sets apart from competitors, and the thing that we always focused on really early on was the easy use. I think even a decade later, that still comes through in terms of using various solutions. At the time, none of the solutions mentioned, other than WordPress, were really very prevalent. Even WordPress was still a lot smaller than it was today, and so there wasn't really a lot out there on the market. Like I mentioned about ideas seeming to spontaneously, pop into multiple people's heads at the same time. A lot of other companies were in the process of creating a product and had a similar idea. So then the second half of the question is, how did we know that it was an idea that people needed? And I think for a lot of these ideas, you go about your life and you sort of notice, you start to perk up when you see, hey, this is something that's not, there's no good solution for this. This is something people are struggling with. This is something people kind of talk to me about a lot. And for us, it came with both a background. Growing up, I was a web designer for a lot of companies, and so had some experience with this, but also just with friends and acquaintances that were always asking me to help them with front page. At the time, it was Microsoft Front Page or Dreamweaver, and then just having that firsthand experience of how bad these tools were, really allowed us to watch, what would become our eventual customers, struggle trying to use these tools, and then come up with better ideas for how to solve that same problem.
Okay, next question. What defines a world-class team?
That is a fantastic question. So what defines a world-class team? I think the definition of a world-class team is going to, it's not going to be one cookie cutter definition for every company. A world-class team is really specific to the problem that you're trying to solve. So, a world-class team to build self-driving cars is going to look very different from a world-class team, to build, the next TikTok or social media app, is going to look very different from a world-class team that, that wants to, build a new database or, enterprise software. And so I think, what matters is, effectively, can you hire, there are obviously similarities, right? So you want smart people, you want, people who are mission aligned, who are working on the problem because, they're not just mercenaries, but they really have a feel for what this problem is. You want, then, okay, those are probably commonalities across all teams. Then, then you start to boil down into, what is specific to your team. In that case, maybe, maybe you don't want any assholes on your team. You want people who, really are good people that you can enjoy working with, and that, will help you attract others. So I think, you continue boiling it down, but the further and further you boil it down, obviously it gets very, very specific. At the end of the day, I think, hiring a world-class team, it comes down to two things. It comes down to the raw talents of the people that you hire, and it comes down to the culture of the company. And, what's interesting is at any scale, any company really has hired individuals from a whole bunch of other companies that weren't as successful as them, right? So when you think about it from that regard, well, why is company A more successful than company B, right? Even though it has a lot of the same individuals. And, there's a lot in there, but a lot of it does at some point come down to the culture. So I think, you want to be extremely selective about who you hire, because that not only forms the initial team that everything is built around, but that also forms really the culture of the company is really formed by the first dozen people or so. And so, as you're working to build that team, that answer of what specifically is a world-class team is going to be different for you, but really it's something that a lot of people spend a lot of time, as you're building your company, you spend a lot of time, really making sure you get that right.
Okay, next question. How often did you find yourself wearing different hats, working in positions that you were not officially assigned to, and how did those experiences go?
Well, the role of a CEO is to at times wear every hat, and a CEO at a small company is maybe not quite as glamorous as it sounds. A lot of times, being the CEO is just doing the job that there's no one else to do, and that might literally be cleaning the kitchen, or putting together desks for the new hire, or whatever that might be. So in a startup, the concept of an assigned role is really non-existent. Really, it's just you have a small collection of people with various innate skills and talents, and a lot of work to be done. And you just kind of assign that work as best to try to play to everyone's skills that they have. And so depending, that might sound terrifying, or it might sound exciting. And I think one of the advantages to working in a startup is it actually can be super exciting, because you're not pigeonholed into just your specific role. This is all you're allowed to do. That's not your purview. If you have an idea in a different area, it's like that's not your area, or maybe not your level of seniority to be able to contribute that. At a startup, it's like everyone's on the same team, and everyone's contributing, and everyone's input is typically really respected. And so, not only do you have, much larger ability to impact the direction of the company, you also have a much larger ability to try on different hats and do lots of things and gain lots of experience. So it can be a really, actually just a tremendously fun experience.
Speaking of the early days, which of the top early challenges did you find to be the most difficult to overcome?
Yeah, I mean, the most difficult to overcome is always product market fit. And you see it because even when I talk to entrepreneurs or other students, that's the one that more than any other is always brought up. It's how do I build my app when I don't know how to program? How do I attract users? How do I, it's not, the questions aren't typically framed in the sense of how do I find product market fit, but like all these things at the end of the day kind of boil down to the challenge of building a product that meets a need that a lot of people have. And so I think that's by far the most challenging at a startup, and one of the reasons I wanted to spend the most time talking about it in this session.
Okay, next question. Are companies that create markets more prone to being knocked out of the market by the competitors that follow? For example, Tesla pulling lower and lower numbers once other car companies start going electric.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Typically, no. Typically, the category creator ends up owning the category, and there's a lot of reasons why. But that's why there's now, talk about minimum viable product and product market fit and all the discussions happen. There's actually, a whole group of people now that talk about category creation, because it's recognized to be so valuable in terms of, long-term potential of the company. And why is it that, incumbents don't eventually catch up? And there's several reasons, but first of all, the company that creates the category typically gets a substantial head start over incumbents. And in Tesla's case, you could think about this. Really, probably the key piece is battery technology. And the way that this shows up is that basically every other manufacturer still, including luxury performance auto manufacturers that launch. That launch EVs are still struggling to try to match Tesla on range, on 0 to 60 speed, on charging time, on all these things that are kind of inherent to this technology that Tesla's figured out. Now, that's not to say that they won't catch up, but then typically by the point that they catch up, Tesla's on to the next thing, right? And that's where, with Tesla's next, battery platform, they'll make a gigantic leap forward that, by the time, effectively by the time, the current incumbents are aiming for what you're doing today, you're already working on what you're going to be doing in 2 or 3 years, right? And so, and then that's one element. The second element is, typically the team, by inventing a new market, that's the team that was able to generate the insight and continues to generate insights. So again, any incumbent that's just copying is inherently, at a delay because they're copying what you're doing today. And depending on your industry, in cars, that might take 3 to 5 years to copy what you're doing today. In software, maybe that takes, 3 to 6 months. But by the time they're finished copying where you're at today, typically, you're now moving forward because you have that team that is able to understand the market better and generate new insights. And then the third one is really just around brand and perception, market perception. So typically when you create a new category, it's really hard for an incumbent to start to build the perception. Now, maybe this won't be as big of a deal for electric vehicles, but oftentimes in other markets, let's say like enterprise software, it just becomes really hard for an incumbent who sort of in their customers' minds, maybe there's high awareness, but they're pigeonholed, into being in a certain category. And now all of a sudden when the market starts shifting and starts looking for a new category that they're now shopping for, typically the incumbents aren't considered to be in that category. And so, there's a strong amount of difficulty as the incumbent to start to rebrand yourself and shift the perception, that, hey, I actually offer something really valuable in this new category and something for you to consider. So typically, typically the companies that create a new market and sort of get exit velocity by scaling up the company quickly, they will typically hold on to the reins of that category.
Here's a related kind of two-part question. Does Uber's demand lower if already existing taxis decide to incorporate ride sharing within taxis, like going in the same direction? Are protection laws applicable after the product is launched?
So, so this is a great question, and another reason why, another example of why the incumbent tends to win the market, or sorry, the new player tends to win the market and not the incumbent. So, technically, when Uber came out, taxi, or even at any period of time, 3-4 years after Uber came out, and it's kind of obvious that this is the direction things were going. You would think, hey, why don't taxis just pivot? But typically there's a host of reasons the incumbent can pivot. Whether those are taxis didn't have the teams to really create a good technology solution. They just didn't have that expertise on their team. So that's number one. If you even try to pay with a credit card or use any apps that were created for taxis, typically they're a very, very poor experience. And they also typically didn't understand what it was about the Uber experience that made that so much better. If they would have understood that, they probably would have incorporated that in the first place into their product. So that's number one. The other is oftentimes there are very human incentive structures in place that make that difficult. So with taxis, you had this whole model of the taxi medallion, and people were really invested in it. And it also meant that the larger the scale of an organization, the harder it is to get to change, because in any change you're going to have winners and losers. And there's going to be this huge fight and this huge resistance to change, because no one wants to end up on the side of being the loser to change. And so, this applies equally to large companies where, even when something is maybe very obvious as something you should do within that organization, maybe a subgroup is negatively impacted. Maybe they have political capital, and so they start to push, and for this change not to happen. So effectively, I think, it's another reason why, it's very difficult for incumbents to adapt. And another reason why, when you go, but it is a reason why when you do create a market, you need to go out and scale as quickly as possible, because it does happen sometimes that incumbents are nimble, and are able to react to the new market that you've created.
Okay, next question. What was the web hosting service market looking like when you entered with Weebly? How did you differentiate yourselves from other similar companies?
Sure. I'll try to give the short answer to this question, because I could probably talk for hours about this. But at the time, the web hosting market was literally web hosting. And so, typically what people would do is they would either design a web page themselves, either by programming it or by hiring a web designer, and they would end up with some amount of HTML code, scripts, whatever, and then they would go and find a web host. So something like a HostGator or any number of web hosts that were out there. They'd pay $5-10 a month for a web host, and then they would also go and buy a domain, and maybe they go to GoDaddy and buy their domain, and then they would upload their web pages to the host, and they would connect their domain via DNS to the host. And sometimes this whole thing was actually managed by their web designer for them. But each of those elements were provided by different companies or different people that were then sort of cobbled together. And it turns out that was just actually a very poor experience as well. And so it required a lot of technical knowledge. If you want to upload to the web host, typically you had to know about SFTP, and that was kind of esoteric. And so one of the things that we did, we really wanted to focus on the ease of use of the experience. And so we actually integrated web hosting. We provided it for free, which at the time was unheard of. And we provide the web hosting for free. You would be in the tool, you would click publish, and then all of a sudden, boom, it's online. Like, that was mind blowing to people. And then we also integrated the domain so that you can buy the domain and it would just automatically be hooked up right in the same spot. And I think those three key pieces kind of formed the key elements of, a web-based app, which also was new at the time to edit a web page, combined with having hosting integrated and free, combined with being able to hook up a domain. Those were the three key pieces that kind of created this new market. and create a substantially different service from what was out there. And really, again, it was focused on, our early and, continued emphasis on just making the experience, lowering the bar, making it incredibly easy to use so it'd be accessible to more people.
Next question. Do you think it is more difficult now to find a hidden need as products and solutions have been created more?
No, I don't think so. I think that there's certainly more awareness of tech startups than there was in 2007. Going back to 2007, 2006 when we got started, those were really, everyone was just starting to come out of their .com hangover. Everyone felt like the internet at the time was maybe a bit overhyped, hadn't delivered, and people were just starting to get excited again. So certainly at the time, some of the ideas were a little bit more obvious, but there are still a lot of hidden, underserved markets and industries. I think, I've always thought a really cool place to go look for a big company idea, an idea that actually has the potential to scale into a very significant company, is to go look at industries that are typically underserved by technology, right? And so, even, this is going to be maybe 5 years ago now, one example, but there's a company that pioneered the use of commercial drones in order to do, equipment inspections. And so maybe you have a bridge, right? And it would typically be very expensive to get people to inspect the underside of the bridge or what it might be. And you could actually use a drone to go do that. And you can do it in an automated way. Maybe it's a grain silo, right? And the drone can fly in and look for cracks, whatever it is that, in these kind of industrial. So, that's one area that was really underserved by technology. There's still a ton of areas, and these tend to be the kind of quote unquote unsexy industries, right? That are still woefully underserved by technology. And so I think that's one pattern that I really like, is just looking for this kind of, industry that's maybe not hyped up, but one that is just desperately needing technology and going and solving their problems.
Okay. This is a multi-layer question. What are the most important factors of a successful business partnership? And what were typical issues that came about when dealing with business partners, and how did you resolve these problems?
Great question. We could talk about that for a very long time. I think, first of all, when you talk about having business partners, there's even an underlying assumption that you have business partners. Some people prefer to go it alone, and I think generally speaking, that's an anti-pattern, meaning solo founders tend not to create successful companies as often. So, the underlying assumption is a good one, which is generally speaking, it's beneficial to, to have partners or co-founders in your company. I think the relationship is really the same as any relationship. It's something you got to invest in. It's something that, that can be put in, through really dramatic stressors. And, I think it really helps to have a foundation of friendship, and one where you can, really, again, like any relationship, one where you can kind of work through your issues and, talk through disagreements and, be able to do so productively. So, I'd really just say the most important thing is just investing in the relationship.
Okay. How did you stay motivated before you got funding when things were not going as great as you would have hoped at the time?
Yeah, again, I mean, I think we're just excited by the idea, really excited by the idea. Even before applying to Y Combinator, we we're just working like every spare minute of the day. That summer we were on an internship, and we'd come home at night and continue working on the ideas and continue building out the prototype and the alpha and the beta. So I think having some element of passion for the idea, having some element of passion for the thing that you're doing, whether that's design or programming or whatever it is, certainly helps. But the other thing to understand is that, talk about staying motivated. Building a company up to scale, is generally a 7-year minimum commitment, and there'll be times when it's, your company's in the spotlight and it's very, it feels very exhilarating, and there will be times when that spotlight fades, and it's down to the actual grimy hard work of scaling a company. And so I think I don't know how much more that I could add besides it is a very long journey, but a very fulfilling one. And if you have that passion and it feels like something you have to do, it can be tremendously rewarding.
Cool. Next one is, how much market testing or interviewing of customers did you perform before you started designing the product?
Great question. So the short answer is a lot. We would constantly talk to customers. We would watch them use, I had a friend who actually, for another Penn State class, she had to design, for an astronomy class, she had to design a website in Front Page. And, I'd watch her use Front Page, and a lot of those initial ideas for how the product would end up really came from those early experiences of that the sort of UX research of watching and talking to customers. We actually, Dan, Chris, and myself answered emails for the first 1 million users. Up until 1 million users, all of the customer support was handled by the founders, primarily Dan, actually, and that was a really valuable source of being in touch with your customers and talking and understanding their needs and being able to reincorporate those quickly back into the product. So I really can't underscore how important it is really to be in constant contact with your customer base, and listening to their problems, and just creating really innovative solutions to those.
Next question is, did you take these steps, the 3 steps of building a remarkable product, from the get-go, or did it take some time to realize that it's what you needed to do?
Good question. I certainly can't say we did it perfectly. There's some things that I think we did well. We certainly had a customer focus. We iterated rapidly. We're really laser focused on the customer and their problems. That was all good. There's plenty of things we got into that were turned out to be massive distractions along the way. So I think our focus could have been better. It always feels like it could be better in hindsight. So that's really where hopefully these are some of the lessons that we learned throughout the years. Hopefully that you can benefit from them. But again, that focus, just having that laser focus on whatever that next milestone, whatever unlocks that next milestone, is just critically important.
The next question was, how many iterations do you think you went through?
Well, we used to, at some point, iterations is even, the concept of iteration is meaningless, because we went through thousands. We would ship code every single day. So, for many years, every day was an iteration, and we would, we'd try new things. We would see what was working, we'd see what wasn't working. And sometimes we'd launch something that didn't work and we'd abandon it. We'd try something different. So really, went through a ton of different iterations. And, even in the first 18 months, probably went through hundreds of iterations until we finally got the product market fit.
We still have another dozen questions or so, but I am aware that we're close to time. So I didn't know, Steve, if you had anything specific, or do you want me to just keep going, or?
I think it's really up to David and his, he might have other commitments. I'm happy to stay. I'm certain, but David is the guest.
Maybe we could take another, another 2 or 3 questions. Yeah, I'm happy to stay on for an extra few minutes.
Thank you.
Great. So if somebody has an idea but does not have a team, what would you advise to help create a team?
Great question. So there's a few different ways you could go about that. The first and most important is understanding, can you level yourself up? Can you acquire new skills so that it's not that you don't need a team, but the more that you can do yourself, the less you rely on having a team. And in the very earliest days, that's probably going to be the most fruitful. Then the question is, okay, maybe I am a program, maybe I have learned to program and I know a little bit about some design, and I've taught myself some business concepts, and so I have some ideas about monetization, and then at that point, hopefully you made a fairly good amount of progress. It really comes down to, can you attract others to join you on that mission and to take that journey with you? And and there's different ways you can do that. I think the definition, to my mind, the difference between a co-founder and the first employee at a company is really, a co-founder is anyone who joins without receiving a full-time salary on day one, but who makes effectively a large commitment of their time, full-time, half-time, whatever that might be. And even if you join pre-Series A or whatever it may be, if you're getting a market rate salary on day one when you join, that's an employee. And so I think then the question becomes, okay, so I'm trying to build a team. How do I, let's say before funding, how do I attract other co-founders, right? And I think what's important there is just understanding, what do you bring to the table, and how can you demonstrate your value and your commitment to other potential co-founders? And so I think, let's say you're non-technical and you want to join forces with a technical co-founder, right? Some of the best ways you can demonstrate your commitment to that would be, again, to learn to code, because now all of a sudden you speak a shared language. So I would just think, and then after that point, it's really down to, it's really a dating game. Effectively, it's down to going in your in your social network, at events, wherever you might meet people, and try to see if you could find, other people that are similarly interested in the problem like you, and that have those complementary skill sets.
If somebody has what strategies do you use in a feedback phase? How do you decide what suggestions to accept and which ones to ignore?
Great question. So I think, I would say, hopefully I've addressed a good bit of that in the slides. A few things that, come to mind. The first one is listening to your target customer. So, again, understanding that you're listening to the feedback from the right people. That certainly helps you filter out some of it. Understanding the problems and not the solutions proposed. So, I think getting down to what are the problems that are, that are most often run to, that are shared by the most customers and that really cause the most pain, and that should help you prioritize. I will say at the end of the day that you'll end up with, and I think this is what the question is getting at, is that you end up with a list that's longer than your capacity to go out and fix. And so there's then that's where this, it's a little bit more art than science in terms of, which problems do we tackle first? And, again, you could go down to make sure they're from the right customers, make sure that they impact a lot of people, make sure that they're, problems that are deep needs and not just kind of surface needs. And then at that point, I think hopefully if you're talking with a lot of customers, you'll just get this intuitive sense on which are the most important ones to tackle. That becomes a different problem as you start to scale up the company, and not everyone is talking to customers the same way. Maybe you've gotten into a bad habit of not talking to customers on a regular basis, and then it's a little bit more of this spreadsheet battle. When in fact, really, the more customers you talk to, the more intuitive and obvious it gets which ones you should tackle first.
And this one is kind of a companion question, and I think would be a good one to end on. How far along after launch do you stop conducting interviews and testing sessions, or do these things, should you never stop doing these things?
You should never stop doing them. I personally, to this date, still have conversations with our customers on a very regular basis. I understand, on a weekly basis, I'm talking, texting, emailing, Slacking, whatever it may be, with both large and small customers to understand, where we continue to improve the product. So it really is this continuous process of, positive iteration to continue making the product better and better and better, to continue refining that fit.
I think that's a good place to stop. Thank you so much, David. I really appreciate it. We all do.
Thank you very
Awesome.
much, David.
Thanks, Steve, for having me.
Yeah, that was great as usual. I look forward to hearing it again next time. I never get enough. So really appreciate you taking the time today, and hope you're doing well. Are you in California?
I am. Yeah, I'm in the Bay Area.
Oh, good, good. Yeah, hopefully you're staying sane. But anyway, thanks again for coming. And on behalf of all these people who can't clap, or I'll clap again. Thanks again.
Thanks again for having me. I can't wait to make it out to State College sometime soon, hopefully.
Yeah, the weather's getting nice.
All right. Thanks all.
Yeah.
Take care now.